When Margaret saw my daughter driving the old police car, she screamed, "Fake cop," and called 911. But when Emma had a heart attack from stress, Margaret grabbed a gun instead of helping. She shot my innocent 16-year-old daughter, not knowing I'm the county sheriff who would make her pay. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The phone call came at 2:47 p.m. on a Tuesday that changed everything. I was reviewing case files when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. "Is this Sheriff Michael Davidson?" The voice was shaky, professional but strained. "Yes, this is Sheriff Davidson. Who am I speaking with?" "This is Dr. Sarah Chin at Mercy General Hospital. Your daughter Emma has been brought in with a gunshot wound. She's in surgery now." The words hit me like a freight train. Emma. My sweet 16-year-old daughter with the heart condition that already made every day a precious gift. The case files scattered across my desk as I stood up, my hands trembling. "What happened? How is she?" "Sir, I need you to get here as soon as possible. She's stable, but there are complications because of her heart condition. The surgery is delicate." I grabbed my keys and badge, my mind racing. Emma had been driving to her cardiology appointment. She was so careful, so responsible. What could have happened? The drive to the hospital felt like an eternity. Every red light, every slow driver ahead of me felt like torture. My radio crackled with routine calls, but nothing else mattered. My little girl was fighting for her life. When I arrived at the hospital, I found my wife Sarah already there, her face streaked with tears. She looked up when she saw me, and I could see the fear in her eyes. "Michael," she whispered, falling into my arms. She was just going to her appointment. She was being so careful. "Tell me what happened," I said, trying to keep my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. Sarah took a shaky breath. "There was a traffic incident in the Willowbrook neighborhood. You know where that HOA president lives? The one who's always causing problems." My blood ran cold. Margaret Thornfield. The woman who had made life miserable for half the county with her petty power trips and nasty attitude. Everyone knew her as the neighborhood Karen who called the cops on kids for playing too loud, who filed complaints about every tiny infraction she could imagine. What did she do? I asked, though I was already dreading the answer. Emma was driving slowly through the neighborhood, you know how she always does because of her heart medication making her dizzy sometimes. She was being extra careful. Margaret came out of her house screaming about speeders and reckless teens. She was waving her arms wildly, yelling at Emma to stop. Sarah's voice broke. Emma pulled over to see what was wrong. She was trying to be polite, you know how she is. She rolled down her window and asked if everything was okay. That's when Margaret saw the car. I felt my jaw clench. "What about the car?" "It was your old patrol car, the one Emma drives to school. The black and white one from when you were a deputy." Margaret started screaming about how Emma was impersonating a police officer, how she was going to have her arrested and thrown in jail. The pieces were falling into place and I could feel my anger building. Emma drove my old retired patrol car because it was the safest vehicle we owned, and with her heart condition, safety was everything. The car had been legally purchased at a police auction years ago. Emma tried to explain, Sarah continued, tears flowing freely now. She told Margaret that she was Sheriff Davidson's daughter, that it was just an old car that we bought legally. But Margaret wouldn't listen. She kept screaming about how she was going to sue us, how she was going to have Emma arrested for impersonating an officer. Then what happened? Sarah's next words shattered my heart. Emma had a panic attack. You know how stress affects her heart. She started having trouble breathing, clutching her chest. Her face went pale and she was gasping for air. Margaret thought Emma was being dramatic, mocking her. She started yelling louder, calling Emma a spoiled brat, saying she was faking it for attention. I closed my eyes, picturing my daughter struggling to breathe while this woman screamed at her. Emma's heart condition wasn't just a minor issue. She'd been born with a complex congenital heart defect that required constant monitoring and medication. Stress could literally kill her. Emma managed to call 911, Sarah continued. She was gasping into the phone, trying to explain that she needed help, that she was having a cardiac episode and couldn't breathe. But Margaret grabbed the phone from her hands and started yelling at the dispatcher, saying Emma was faking an emergency and wasting taxpayer money. My hands were shaking now, rage building in my chest like a pressure cooker about to explode. The dispatcher could hear Emma in the background, struggling to breathe, making those horrible wheezing sounds. When Margaret realized they were still going to send an ambulance, she completely lost it. She started screaming that Emma was a liar, a fraud, that she was going to make sure everyone knew what a fake she was. And then? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Margaret ran back to her house. Emma was still in the car, trying to use her inhaler, trying to calm down. She was texting me, telling me she was scared, that she couldn't breathe properly and her chest was hurting. Then Margaret came back out. Sarah's voice dropped to a whisper. She had a gun. The world stopped. Everything around me faded except for Sarah's voice and the horror of what she was telling me. She started waving it around, screaming that she was going to protect her neighborhood from criminals and liars. She was yelling about how young people today have no respect, how they think they can get away with anything. Emma was terrified. She tried to drive away, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the steering wheel. That's when Margaret fired. I felt like I was going to be sick. Someone had shot my daughter. My sweet, innocent daughter who wouldn't hurt a fly, who spent her free time volunteering at the animal shelter despite her health issues. The bullet went through the driver's side window, Sarah continued. It hit Emma in the shoulder, but the impact made her jerk the wheel violently. The car hit a parked car and Emma hit her head on the steering wheel. Between the gunshot, the crash, and her heart condition, she went into cardiac arrest right there. I had to sit down. The thought of Emma, alone and terrified, being shot by this crazy woman was too much to bear. The neighbors called 911 again when they heard the gunshot. When the paramedics arrived, they found Emma unconscious, bleeding heavily and in cardiac arrest. Margaret was standing over the car, still holding the gun, telling everyone that Emma had it coming and that she was protecting the neighborhood. Dr. Chin appeared in the hallway, still in her surgical scrubs. Her expression was serious but not hopeless, which gave me a small measure of relief. Sheriff Davidson, Mrs. Davidson, she said, approaching us. I have an update on Emma's condition. We both stood up, holding hands tightly. The surgery went well, Dr. Chin said, and I felt my knees nearly buckle with relief. We were able to remove the bullet from her shoulder without any major complications. However, her heart condition complicated things significantly. The stress and blood loss triggered a serious cardiac episode that required immediate intervention. But she's going to be okay? Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She's stable now, but she's going to need extensive recovery time. Her heart is under a lot of strain, and we'll need to monitor her closely for the next several weeks. The good news is that there doesn't appear to be any permanent damage to her heart function, but we'll need to adjust her medications. Relief flooded through me, but it was quickly replaced by a burning anger. Margaret Thornfield had nearly killed my daughter over a misunderstanding, over her own ignorance and hatred. Can we see her? I asked. She's still sedated, but yes, you can see her for a few minutes. Walking into that hospital room was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Emma looked so small and fragile in that bed, surrounded by machines monitoring her heart rate and breathing. Her shoulder was bandaged and there were scratches on her face from the crash. But she was alive. I sat beside her bed and took her hand gently. I'm here, sweetheart, I whispered. Daddy's here. Sarah sat on the other side, stroking Emma's hair. We stayed there for an hour, just watching her breathe, grateful for every rise and fall of her chest. When we finally left the room, I felt a different kind of determination settling over me. As a father, I was devastated and angry. But as a sheriff, I had a job to do. I called my deputy, James Martinez, who had been with the department for 15 years and was someone I trusted completely. James, I need you to handle the investigation into the shooting of my daughter. I can't be directly involved due to conflict of interest, but I need to know everything. Of course, Sheriff. I've already started gathering information. Margaret Thornfield has been arrested and is in custody. The evidence is overwhelming. We have multiple witnesses, the 911 calls, and security footage from several houses in the neighborhood. Security footage? Yes, sir. The whole thing was captured on at least 3 different home security systems. It's clear that Emma was not at fault and that Margaret was the aggressor throughout the entire incident. The footage shows everything exactly as witnesses described. I felt a grim satisfaction knowing that Margaret's actions were recorded. There would be no way for her to twist the story or claim self-defense. What are the charges? Attempted murder, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, reckless endangerment, and several other charges. The DA is taking this very seriously, especially given Emma's age and medical condition. Good. I want everything done by the book. No shortcuts, no favoritism. I want this case to be airtight. Understood, Sheriff. There's something else you should know. Margaret has been telling anyone who will listen that she doesn't regret what she did. She's claiming Emma was a threat to the neighborhood and that she was protecting everyone from a dangerous criminal. The audacity of this woman was beyond belief. She had shot a 16-year-old girl and was acting like she was some kind of hero. Over the next few days, as Emma slowly recovered, more details emerged about what had happened. The security footage showed everything exactly as Sarah had described. Emma had been driving carefully, well under the speed limit. When Margaret approached her car, Emma had been polite and respectful, even as Margaret screamed at her. The footage also showed Emma's medical emergency clearly. Anyone with eyes could see that she was struggling to breathe, that she was in genuine distress. But Margaret had dismissed it as acting, even going so far as to mock Emma's attempts to use her inhaler. What made it even worse was learning about Margaret's history. James discovered that she had a pattern of aggressive behavior toward young people in the neighborhood. She had filed dozens of false police reports, had harassed families, and had even been involved in several other confrontations that had nearly turned violent. "She's been a problem for years," James told me during one of our briefings. "Multiple families have filed complaints about her behavior. She seems to have a particular hatred for teenagers, especially ones she perceives as being from wealthy families. Why wasn't anything done before? She was careful to stay just within the legal boundaries. Harassment, yes, but nothing that rose to the level of criminal charges. Until now. I learned that Margaret had made Emma's life a nightmare in the weeks leading up to the shooting. She had been following Emma to school, taking pictures of her car, and filing false reports about Emma's driving. She had even confronted other parents, spreading lies about Emma being a danger to the neighborhood. She told Mrs. Henderson that Emma was dealing drugs from that patrol car," James reported. "She convinced Mr. Johnson that Emma was planning to rob houses because she drove slowly through the neighborhood, claiming she was casing homes. The more I learned, the angrier I became. This woman had systematically targeted my daughter, building up a fantasy in her mind that justified her escalating harassment. Emma was in the hospital for a week. Her recovery was slow and difficult, complicated by her heart condition and the trauma of what had happened. She had nightmares, panic attacks, and was terrified to leave the house. The first time she was fully awake and coherent, she looked at me with tears in her eyes and asked, 'Daddy, why did she hate me so much?' I was just trying to be nice. I didn't have an answer for her. How do you explain to a 16-year-old that some people are just filled with hate? How do you tell your daughter that she was shot because of one woman's ignorance and prejudice? Sometimes people make very bad choices, sweetheart," I said, holding her hand. "What happened to you wasn't your fault. You did everything right." "I was so scared," she whispered. "When she came back with the gun, I thought I was going to die. I kept thinking about how I hadn't told you and Mom that I loved you that morning. My heart broke all over again. No child should ever have to feel that kind of terror." Emma told me more about what had happened in the weeks before the shooting. Margaret had been following Emma to school, taking pictures of her car, and filing false reports about Emma's driving. She had even confronted other parents, spreading lies about Emma being a danger to the neighborhood. "She told Mrs. Henderson that I was dealing drugs from that patrol car," Emma said. "She convinced Mr. Johnson that I was planning to rob houses because I drove slowly through the neighborhood, claiming I was casing homes. The more I learned, the angrier I became. This woman had systematically targeted my daughter, building up a fantasy in her mind that justified her escalating harassment. She was always watching me, Daddy. Every time I drove through the neighborhood to get to Dr. Peterson's office, she would come out and stare at me. Sometimes she would take pictures of the car with her phone. Why didn't you tell me? I thought she was just a weird neighbor. I didn't want to bother you with something so silly. I thought if I just ignored her, she would leave me alone." My heart broke thinking about Emma dealing with this harassment alone, trying to protect me from worry while this woman was building up to something far worse. "She started following me to school," Emma continued. "I would see her car behind me and she would honk her horn and yell things out her window. She called me a spoiled brat, and said I didn't deserve to drive such a nice car. I felt my anger building again. The old patrol car wasn't even that nice. It was a basic sedan with over 200,000 miles on it. But to Margaret, it represented everything she hated about our family. The worst part was when she cornered me at the grocery store," Emma said, her voice getting smaller. "She told me that she knew who I was, that she was going to make sure everyone knew what a fake I was. She said she was going to have me arrested for pretending to be a police officer. What did you do?" I tried to explain just like I always did. I told her that you were the sheriff, that it was just an old car. But she wouldn't listen. She said I was a liar, that no sheriff would let his daughter drive around in a police car. She said she was going to call the state police and have our whole family investigated. The more Emma told me, the clearer it became that Margaret had been planning this confrontation for weeks. She had convinced herself that Emma was some kind of criminal, and nothing was going to change her mind. The day of Margaret's arraignment, I sat in the courtroom, watching as she was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit. She looked around the courtroom with defiance, as if she was the victim in all of this. Her lawyer tried to argue for bail, claiming she was a pillar of the community and not a flight risk. But the prosecutor presented the evidence methodically. The security footage, the 911 calls, the witness statements, and Emma's medical records all painted a clear picture of what had happened. When the judge denied bail, Margaret actually had the audacity to stand up and shout, "This is ridiculous. I was protecting my neighborhood from criminals." The judge's response was swift and stern. "Ma'am, you shot an unarmed 16-year-old girl who was having a medical emergency. You will remain in custody until trial." As Margaret was led away, she looked directly at me. There was no remorse in her eyes, no acknowledgement of the pain she had caused. Just anger and defiance. The trial took place 3 months later. Emma was strong enough to testify, though it was one of the hardest things she'd ever had to do. She sat in that witness chair, her voice shaking but determined, and told the jury exactly what had happened. "I was just trying to get to my doctor's appointment," she said. "When Mrs. Thornfield started yelling at me, I pulled over because I thought maybe I could help with whatever was wrong. I never imagined that being polite could almost get me killed." The defense attorney tried to paint Emma as a reckless teenager who had been impersonating a police officer. But the evidence was overwhelming. The security footage showed everything, and expert witnesses testified about Emma's heart condition and how stress could be life-threatening for her. The most damaging evidence was Margaret's own words. The 911 calls captured her screaming at Emma, dismissing her medical emergency and even making threats. Her behavior after the shooting was equally damning, as she had shown no remorse and had continued to justify her actions. When Margaret testified in her own defense, she showed no remorse whatsoever. "I was protecting my neighborhood," Margaret said firmly. "That girl was a menace and no one was doing anything about it. Someone had to take action." "You shot an unarmed 16-year-old girl," the prosecutor said during cross-examination. "How was that protecting anyone?" "She was impersonating a police officer," Margaret replied. "She was terrorizing the neighborhood, driving around in that fake police car, intimidating people. I had to stop her." "Did you know that Emma Davidson has a serious heart condition?" "She was faking that too," Margaret said without hesitation. "It was all part of her act. She was trying to get sympathy so she could get away with her crimes." The jury looked horrified by Margaret's testimony. Here was a woman who had shot a teenager and was still convinced that she was the victim. "Do you feel any remorse for what you did?" the prosecutor asked. "No," Margaret replied firmly. "I did what needed to be done. I would do it again if I had to." That statement sealed her fate. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning with a guilty verdict on all charges. When the verdict was read, Margaret stood up and shouted, "This is a miscarriage of justice. You're all protecting that criminal family." Margaret was sentenced to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 10 years. As she was led away to begin her sentence, Margaret turned to me one last time. "You think you've won," she said, her voice full of venom. "But I know what I did was right." I stood up and looked her directly in the eyes. "Ma'am, you shot my daughter. An innocent 16-year-old girl with a heart condition who was trying to be kind to you. You nearly killed her because of your own hatred and ignorance. You'll have plenty of time to think about whether that was right." Emma's recovery was long and difficult. The physical wounds healed, but the emotional trauma took much longer. She went through months of therapy dealing with PTSD and anxiety. There were days when she couldn't leave the house, when the fear was too overwhelming. But gradually, with the support of our family and her therapist, Emma began to heal. She started driving again, though it took her months to feel comfortable behind the wheel. She went back to school, though she struggled with anxiety around confrontational situations. One day, about a year after the shooting, Emma came to me with a proposal. "Dad, I want to start a program to educate people about heart conditions in teenagers. I want to make sure no one else has to go through what I did because someone doesn't understand what a medical emergency looks like." I was so proud of her I could barely speak. Here was my daughter, who had been through hell, wanting to turn her trauma into something positive that could help others. Emma's program became a reality. She worked with the local school district and medical community to create educational materials about recognizing medical emergencies in young people. She spoke at schools, community centers, and even at police training sessions. The program grew beyond what any of us had imagined. Emma received recognition from the State Medical Association and even spoke at a national conference about heart conditions in teenagers. She turned her pain into purpose, helping countless other young people and their families. Emma graduated from high school with honors despite everything she had been through. Her graduation speech was about resilience and second chances, and there wasn't a dry eye in the audience when she finished speaking. 2 years ago, someone tried to end my story, Emma said from the podium. They thought they knew who I was and what I deserved. But they were wrong. Today I'm not just a survivor. I'm someone who chose to turn pain into purpose. Emma went on to study medicine, inspired by the doctors who had saved her life. During her pre-med years, she continued expanding her awareness program. She partnered with hospitals across the state to train emergency responders on recognizing cardiac episodes in young people. Too many teenagers die because their symptoms are dismissed as anxiety or attention-seeking, Emma would tell medical students during her guest lectures. We have to do better. We have to listen. Her work caught the attention of the American Heart Association, who invited her to speak at their national conference. Standing before hundreds of cardiologists and researchers, Emma shared her story with a confidence that amazed me. I was shocked because someone refused to believe that a teenager could have a serious medical condition, she said. That ignorance nearly killed me. But it also gave me a mission, to make sure no other young person suffers because adults don't take their health seriously. During medical school, Emma specialized in cardiology as we had expected. But she also pursued additional training in trauma counseling, wanting to help patients deal with the emotional aftermath of medical emergencies. When you survive something like what I went through, she explained to me during one of our weekly dinners, you realize that healing the body is only half the battle. The mind and spirit need attention too. Emma's professors were impressed by her dedication and unique perspective. Dr. Rebecca Stone, one of her mentors, told me privately that Emma was the most compassionate medical student she had ever taught. She has this incredible ability to connect with patients who are scared and traumatized, Dr. Stone said. It's like she can see right into their hearts and know exactly what they need to hear. During her residency, Emma worked with a particularly difficult case, a teenage boy named Marcus who had been shot in a gang-related incident. He was recovering physically, but emotionally he was shut down, refusing to talk to anyone. Emma spent hours with Marcus, not pushing him to talk but simply being present. She shared her own story, showed him her scars, and talked about the long road to healing. I know what it's like to have someone try to take your life, she told him quietly. I know what it's like to feel like the world is full of people who want to hurt you. But I also know that there are people who want to help you heal. Slowly Marcus began to open up. He started participating in his physical therapy, talking to the counselors, and eventually he even smiled. When he was discharged, he hugged Emma and said, "Thank you for not giving up on me." That moment reminded me of something Emma had said years earlier. She wanted to be the person who gave families hope in their darkest moments. She was already becoming that person. During her 3rd year of residency, Emma met David Rodriguez, a fellow cardiology resident who shared her passion for pediatric heart conditions. David had lost a younger sister to an undiagnosed heart defect when he was in college, and he understood Emma's drive to help young patients. The first time I saw Emma with a patient, David told me later, I knew she was special. She wasn't just treating a condition, she was healing a whole person. Their relationship developed slowly, built on mutual respect and shared values. David understood Emma's scars, both physical and emotional, and he never made her feel like she needed to be anything other than exactly who she was. When Emma brought David home to meet us, I could see immediately that this was serious. The way he looked at her, the way he listened when she spoke about her work, the way he instinctively knew when she needed support during difficult moments, it was clear that he truly understood her. He makes me feel safe, Emma told Sarah one evening after David had gone home. Not just physically safe but emotionally safe. Like I can be completely myself with him. They were married 3 years later in a beautiful ceremony at the hospital chapel where Emma had recovered from her shooting. Dr. Chin, who had saved Emma's life, performed the ceremony. It was a celebration not just of their love, but of Emma's journey from victim to survivor to healer. During the reception, Emma gave a speech that brought tears to everyone's eyes. 8 years ago, someone tried to end my story with a bullet, she said, her voice strong and clear. But look at me now. I'm a doctor, I'm married to an amazing man, and I've found my purpose in life. That woman who shot me thought she was destroying me, but she actually set me on the path to becoming exactly who I was meant to be. After their honeymoon, Emma and David opened a joint practice specializing in pediatric cardiology and trauma counseling. They treated patients from across the region, many of whom had been told by other doctors that their cases were hopeless. Emma's approach was revolutionary, She treated not just the medical condition but the whole family. She understood that when a child has a serious heart condition, everyone suffers: parents, siblings, grandparents. Her practice offered support groups, counseling services, and educational resources for entire families. Healing happens in community, Emma would often say. No one should have to face a medical crisis alone. The practice grew rapidly, and they had to hire additional staff to keep up with demand. Emma also continued her speaking engagements, traveling around the country to share her story and advocate for better emergency medical training. One evening, as I watched Emma and David working late in their office, reviewing patient files and planning treatments, I was struck by how far we had all come. 8 years earlier, I had sat in a hospital waiting room, terrified that I was going to lose my daughter. Now here she was, saving other people's children. Margaret Thornfield had died in prison 2 years earlier, still maintaining that she had done nothing wrong. I felt no satisfaction in her death, only sadness that she had wasted her life on hatred and fear. But Emma had taken Margaret's act of violence and transformed it into something beautiful. Every life she saved, every family she helped, every young person she inspired, it was all proof that love really is stronger than hate. On Emma's 30th birthday, we threw a celebration that brought together everyone whose lives she had touched. Patients and their families, medical colleagues, students she had mentored, and volunteers from her awareness program all came to honor the remarkable woman my daughter had become. 30 years ago, we welcomed a beautiful baby girl into the world, I said during my toast. We knew she was special, but we never could have imagined just how extraordinary she would become. Emma has faced the worst that humanity has to offer and responded with the best. She has turned her trauma into triumph, her pain into purpose. Emma hugged me tightly after my speech. "Thank you for never giving up on me," she whispered. "For fighting for me when I couldn't fight for myself, and for believing I could become something more than just a victim." Looking around the room at all the lives Emma had touched, all the good she had done, all the love she had created, I realized that Margaret Thornfield had failed completely. She had tried to destroy my daughter, but Emma had not just survived, she had flourished. That's the real victory. Not revenge, not even justice, but the simple fact that Emma chose love over hate, healing over bitterness, hope over despair. She proved that even the most traumatic experiences can be transformed into sources of strength and purpose. Margaret Thornfield shot my daughter, thinking she was protecting her neighborhood from a threat that existed only in her own mind. But what she really did was create a healer who would go on to save countless lives, a teacher who would change how we think about young people's health, and a woman who proved that no amount of hatred can extinguish the light of love and compassion. That's a legacy worth fighting for. That's a story worth telling. And that's why I know that love always wins in the end.